Hello. So I just watched Disney's 2025 Snow White, and now I've decided to review it. But before we proceed, I need to warn you that there are definitely spoilers here. I also need to deliver a disclaimer. So the disclaimer is I used to work as a teaching assistant in university, and I've had a reputation for being a generous marker. I did my best to leave my bias and preconceptions behind in order to perform a fair evaluation of Disney's Snow White 2025. I made sure I didn't let Rachel Zegler's disrespect of the original Snow White affect my evaluation of the movie. I made sure Snow White 2025 is evaluated on its own merit. Now that that's out of the way, if I could rename the movie, I would call it Shooting Oneself in the Foot. I will ultimately explain why. The cinematography and CGI were beautiful. The castle was beautiful. The singing was very good. If it was all cinematography, CGI, and singing, I would have no problem giving the movie a 9 out of 10. Unfortunately, there were problems with acting, the dialogue, and the story. Let's begin with the acting. Gal Gadot and Rachel Zegler's acting give off a B-movie vibe. However, Gal Gadot's acting was actually forgivable. Her facial expressions were maniacal and sometimes over the top. The reason why Gal Gadot's acting is forgivable to me is that it gives off a breaking the fourth wall quality to it. And I always enjoy those. It feels like someone trying very hard to act instead of a natural flow. I did not take it as a negative, and I even found it charming. On the other hand, I found Rachel Zegler's acting, I found that it had issues. Some of her facial expressions feel forced, like she's putting on the facial expression, but it does not feel genuine. Some of her facial expressions were just off. She can do happy facial expressions, but the facial expression when she was looking at the crossbow in Jonathan, the arrow of the crossbow in Jonathan, felt off. Like that's not the correct facial expression. And Rachel Zegler definitely cannot do sad facial expressions at all. An even bigger issue than the acting is the dialogue. The impression that I got was that the scriptwriter at times felt they were being smart, but they were actually ruining the movie. It's a Disney movie, and I expect Disney dialogue. There was dialogue in the movie that was political in nature. For example, a dwarf critiqued the Queen's greedy economic policies, quote unquote. That sticks out like a sore thumb. I'm not defending greedy economic policies, but they need to make up their mind. Is their audience children or college students? I doubt children know what economic policies even mean. Also, there was the part where it felt like dialogue had socialist undertones. It is such a deviation from what I expect to be Disney dialogue. Without the politics in the movie, I was still prepared to give the movie an 8. With the issues in the dialogue, I could no longer give it an 8 out of 10. One more thing. At some point, Snow White said, "The punishment should not exceed the crime," quote unquote. Since when was Snow White a lawyer or legal theorist? There is a clear mismatch between who Snow White is and the dialogue coming out of her mouth. It undermines the coherence of the story. Third, there are plot issues. The first plot issue had to do with the bandits. They have too much screen time, and it feels like they are in the movie only to serve as a filler. The bandits are in the story to lengthen the movie, but Snow White could have escaped on her own, or with the assistance of the dwarves. I find the inclusion of the bandits to be pointless. To make matters worse, the master of the crossbow joke was obnoxious and irritating. The movie would have been shorter and better without the bandits. It would have had a much better flow. Secondly, Snow White's true love is a bandit? This is poor storytelling. Snow White is a Disney princess. Symmetry demands that her true love be a Disney prince. It's a fairy tale. In the fairy tales, the main character gets the best outcome possible. The best thing, the perfect thing that can happen to Snow White is to end up with a prince, not with a bandit. Whoever heard of a Disney princess ending up with a criminal? Finally, just to be nitpicky, when I started watching the movie, the first thing I noticed is that the title of the book from which the narrator is reading from is entitled Blanche-Neige. But why? Blanche-Neige is French for Snow White. Why are they assuming the audience know enough French to know it translates to Snow White? But the real error in this is inconsistency. You see, at the end of the movie, the book is entitled Snow White in English. So they went from Blanche-Neige from the beginning to Snow White at the end. It doesn't make sense. It's inconsistent. That's bad decision making. So during the first third of the movie, I was actually prepared to give the movie an 8 out of 10. However, by the time the story was over, I was not even sure if I wanted to pass the movie. That is, I wanted to give it a 6 out of 10. However, the movie did have its moments. So I will begrudgingly give it a 7 out of 10. There were things I liked about the movie. I liked the Queen's magic tricks. An example is when she turned a red rose into a white one. It made her look like a magician. But I liked it. In fact, Gal Gadot's parts were all good. The castle was beautiful. Rachel Zegler is definitely a very talented singer. My two favorite songs in the movie was one by her. It was Waiting on a Wish. And the other is the dwarves singing Hi Ho. Minus the politics and the legal theorist speech, Snow White's cheesy dialogues were good. The dwarves' mine was spectacular and better than I expected. It was huge and magical. There is a joke that I enjoyed in the movie. It was the part where Grumpy said the reason why Dopey is called Dopey is because he's a dope. The reason why Happy is called Happy is because he's happy. Then the reason why he's grumpy is because he's misunderstood. That definitely made me chuckle. Anyway, the movie had potential. It could have been an easy 8 out of 10 or even 9 out of 10. However, the movie shot itself in the foot repeatedly. That is why I am only giving it a generous 7 out of 10. The movie is easily a 6.5 out of 10. And that concludes my review of Disney's Snow White 2025. Thank you.